The thing, so with this camera, the speculation was that Nikon is finally making a manual, old-style camera. Now, this is something a lot of people have been waiting for, a kind of stripped-down DSLR, because we've never gotten that from any of the companies, frankly. Everybody just keeps adding features and adding features and adding features. But when the product came out, I thought it was, to me, it's a really big miss. It's a really big fail in my view. And here's the thing. So what they did was they put a lot of retro, what they called like retro type controls on the camera. So it has an ISO, like a dial for ISO instead of like push buttons and a screen. It does the same thing for shutter speed. There's a dial for exposure compensation. There's a dial. And it's supposed to look like an old style camera. But here's the thing I don't understand now. Most people who listen to this podcast, because we see the statistics, are listening on iTunes, so they're not watching us right now. But if you're watching, I actually brought something in to show for the people who do watch the podcast on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're on iTunes, just listen. It will make just as much sense. So if you were to go back to something called the Nikon F5, which was a camera that I loved, and the F5 came out in, I believe the year was 1995, that the Nikon F5, 1996 it came out, the F5. If you looked at a brand new D3X, which is a new Nikon camera, and a 1995 F5, if you looked at them from the side, they look basically identical. If you looked at them from the top, the two cameras are basically identical. If you looked at them from the other side, again, they're almost identical. What this means is that, and the backs are kind of different because one has a screen and one does not. But what this means to me is that Nikon has essentially been using the same type of controls for their cameras since 1996. That's a really long time, and in that time, they've actually gotten it right. Meaning, we're not fighting the camera. It's very easy to set your shutter speed, set your aperture, set your ISO, set your white balance. They figured it out right in 96. They've been doing it, I don't know how many years that is. It's at least 15, right? 96 to now, to 2013. They've gotten it right. There's no reason to change it to another method because the method that we have works right. And if you're trying to go retro, how far back are you trying to go? So you're telling me you're going to make a retro camera that goes back before 1996? Who are these people looking for a camera that is like not 10 years old style controls or even 15 years, but these guys are looking for controls from like 35 years ago? Who are these people? I don't understand it. You follow what I'm saying? Like nostalgia or retro, to me that's like 10 years, 15 years. I'm not interested in going back 30 years. It doesn't make sense. Now, the retro controls can make sense if the camera is designed right. Like I've got retro controls on my Leica M9, but it makes sense because the M9 is a stripped down camera. The DF is not a stripped down camera. It's got all the features of the D800, all the features of the D4S with retro controls. Doesn't make sense. The controls that we have today work fine. I guarantee you I can change my shutter speed faster on a D3 than you're going to change it on a DF with the old style manual controls. I mean, am I making sense in what I'm saying?
I don't, it doesn't really matter to me. No, not really.
I think I'm making a lot of sense. And the thing is this, let me tell you the camera we were waiting for, okay? So follow this progression of cameras, okay? Nikon made the F3 in 1980. 1980, they made something called a Nikon F3, okay? Let me get the year for the F4. F4 came out in 1988. 8 years later, they made the F4. The F4 had a lot of improvements over the F3. It was autofocus, it had different metering modes, and a few other changes. When they created the F4, they kept the F3 in production. They understood that some people wanted the more stripped down camera. The camera that did not have autofocus. You follow so far? Okay, F5 came out in 1996, like I said, correct? 1996. They kept the F3 in production, even though it didn't have all the things the F5 had. And the F5 was revolutionary. You could actually, today you have this menu with all these different options. The F5, they didn't have a screen on the camera that did it, but what they had instead was you could plug the camera into your computer and use your computer to set these options, like how does the autofocus work, and does the film go back into the can at the end, or does it stay out, whatever. They had a ton, like 50 or something options that you could set on your computer. Super advanced camera. 1996, They kept the F3 in production, even though it did not have all of those features. You know when the F3 went out of production? 2001. They kept it in production because they understood that if you had this state-of-the-art F5, there might still be a time that you wanted a camera that was missing features, a camera that was stripped down. Whereas in digital today, let's say you love your D4, which you do, you love your D4. Right. You don't have an option. There's no Nikon option for you to have a camera that does not have like 3 metering modes and 6 flash modes, right? Your camera does repeating flash and rear curtain sync and all of this. Do you use any of this stuff?
No.
No. Do you use multiple exposure capability?
No.
You know, do you use focus lock on with tracking? And
no.
Do you use HDR on the camera? Like,
yeah, but I also don't need a camera that doesn't have that.
You might. You don't know. They never gave you one. How do you know? How do you know?
Because I don't use that. So I don't use that, so I don't need that. And what I need is what I got. And if I needed it, then I would know I needed it.
I disagree, because I think that I think that the fact that the F3 stayed in production had to be indicative of the fact that people were still buying it. They would not have kept it in production if people weren't buying it. In production means they're making new ones. It doesn't just mean you can still go buy the old ones. Mm-hmm. That means like in 2001, you could buy an F3 that was like physically created in 2000. Yeah, people wanted a stripped down camera. And the fact that people are buying Leica M9s, Fuji XE1s, and Fuji X Pro ones is proof that people are trying to find cameras that are a little simpler.
Is the F3 body the basis for this DF camera?
It depends on who you ask. Nikon would say to you that it's based on cameras like the FM2 or the F3. That's what they say. I disagree. I disagree completely. I think the basis for the DF is really like a D700, D800, D600. Those are the basis for the body. They just stuck some retro controls on it, because what those cameras, in particular the FM2, which is another camera, came out in 1980, stayed in production probably past 2001. It was in production as an FM3 forever. Those cameras represented cameras that were missing features, and it wasn't supposed to be your only camera. It was supposed to be a different kind of camera, a secondary camera. And tell me if you remember this. Remember when cell phones first started getting popular, and you could first start accessing your email, or maybe you could send a text, or maybe you could start visiting a website. Do you remember how some people were walking around carrying phones that just made phone calls? They were, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a movement to go retro and to do this stuff, and I see a lot of cameras. See, I'm not versed in all these other bodies because it doesn't matter to me. What matters is the body that makes me money now. So when I saw the body, this DF camera, I said, oh, it looks kind of cool. Maybe I would have to get it in my hands to see if it feels good and it makes picture taking enjoyable. Other than that, I don't need that camera.
Right.
So it's not on my radar.
Right. And I think the funny thing is about it is that it's going to sell like crazy. There are pre-orders. You read on the web, pre-orders are through the roof and stuff. But I think one of the little problems with even looking at the pre-orders or how it sells, if you want the D4 chip, which is what you have, this amazing chip in a camera. It's a 16 megapixel chip. You can just shoot in the dark. I mean, it's incredible how good it is at low light, and it's high enough resolution that it's perfect. But that chip, the only way to get that chip right now is a D4, which costs $6,000. The new DF has the same chip for $3,000. So if you want that chip at a lower price, you have to buy the DF. So a lot of people might be buying a DF, not because they care about the fact that there's a shutter speed dial and a dial for ISO, but they just want that chip in a small body that's half the price of the D4. Like if I bought the DF, which is possible that I'll buy it, it'll be because I want that chip, not because for some dumb reason I just want to turn a shutter speed dial. I mean, that's insane to me. I just want to roll the shutter speed dial. Yeah, I'm fine with a shutter speed dial if the camera brings me back to an F3 or an FM2. But if it's essentially a D700, a D600, a D800, if it's a state-of-the-art camera, then give me state-of-the-art controls. Don't give me an iPhone with a rotary dial on it. That's what you're doing. I don't need a shutter speed dial on a camera that has like 6 different flash modes and metering modes and all these options. It doesn't, to me, it's a fail because it's not the camera that I was waiting for. So that's my take on the DF.